Alaska, or Alaska, is Unangam Tunu, which means the object towards which the action of the sea is directed. More than 730,000 people live here, 8 different ethnic groups, and more than 200 federally recognized tribes with at least 20 indigenous languages.
I'm Yupik and Inupiaq.
We are one of the most diverse places in the country.
I was born in American Samoa, a small dot on a globe.
But like the rest of the world, we're not always appreciative and respectful of our differences.
I still think that there is a lot of work and a lot of progress that needs to be made.
As we watch these civil unrest across the country, we're also reflecting on our collective experiences as Alaskans.
This racial injustice has to stop.
I am physically standing up against these 7 white boys who are staggering in height against me.
Homelessness, micro-aggressions, education, and policing.
At that point, I knew I was just being played with, and I was just being humiliated, and I felt very vulnerable.
From the most vulnerable to those in a position to make a difference, we are one Alaska, many voices. And tonight, we discuss our collective future. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ariane Aramburo.
And I'm Alexis Fernandez.
And we are both Alaskans, born and raised here in the state. I'm from Eagle River.
And I'm from Fairbanks. We'd like to start this evening by thanking the Dena'ina people. Chinan. The Dena'ina have called this land home for at least 1,000 years, and we're thankful for this place, the Alaska Native Heritage Center, and this experience to learn.
For the next 2 hours, we're going to learn who we are as a community, what makes us different, and what's divided us.
We are talking about racism, homelessness, microaggressions, education, and policing. The goal of this program is to open each other's eyes to the perspectives and experiences of others as we strive for equality for all, respect for diversity, and an even greater Alaska.
So I come from a military family. My mom and dad are born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. I attended a historically black college in South Carolina, and it was there and in my adult life where a lot of people would just question my race. I would get the comments of, "What are you?" They would assume I was biracial, which parent is white, which is black, or I had the good hair and I was light-skinned, but I'm proud of my ethnicity. And to be clear and for the record, I am a black woman.
I am from Fairbanks and attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and for the most part my experience has been positive, but our family has experienced racism. My parents immigrated from Mexico to Alaska nearly 50 years ago for a better life, and we were often told by some people to go back to our country. I've also been asked my entire life where I'm from, and when people find out that my parents are from Mexico, they are often surprised.
Now, some of these conversations may be uncomfortable, but to grow, to be better, we have to learn from each other, and that means asking questions and sharing difficult truths. Chinan. Jasmine, how are you talking to your kids about, we're in a whole Black Lives Matter movement, and they're in education. Are you having to have these talks with your kids about, race issues, or were you having these conversations well before then?
Yeah, I talk to my kids about it all the time. I think some people would argue I did it too soon. My daughter watched The Hate U Give when she was 4. It's just an integral part of our household, and I just piggyback off everyone's sentiments. For me, I went to middle school, elementary school, high school in Eagle River, Chugiak. So on top of being invisible in the curriculum, you were just invisible as a student in general. So it was just this perception of black people came to Alaska when the pipeline got here, and that was just it. And there was just not really any other discussion, or military. So for me, I try to have these conversations of race with my kids a lot. I think sometimes as a mom, I overcompensate because I want them to be okay and comfortable. And it's kind of sad, because like for me, raising my kids, what my mom told me is, growing up, making a determination on my education, it was almost like you ended up having to pick. If I want you to have a good education, I understand I'm gonna be sacrificing culture at school because it's just not gonna be there, but I'm gonna do my best at home. And I just realized, I don't want that for my kids. I want my kids to know that they are a part of history, and they have positive history, and they didn't just pop up somewhere. And and I think that's important when it comes to social issues as well. So when I do events, things like that, my kids were there. They were at the rally. They set the chants. I talk with them honestly, because I'd rather them just know and be aware and have a sense of self in terms of like what we're up against, but then back that with, but it's, don't worry about it because you're awesome, you're the best, you're beautiful brown girl skin, you got this mentality. I would say in terms of education, it goes back to that sentiment that change doesn't have to take time if you don't want it to. I really honestly believe there's no reason we can't incorporate ethnic studies and cultural studies sooner. I mean, I definitely appreciate the study, but I graduated in 2004. We had the same conversation then. Like, we even asked our history teacher, can we just talk about brown people on Fridays, like for just an hour? So I just think, you know, in terms of educating in our kids, I just posed the question, it doesn't have to take that long if you don't want it to. There's ample people that would happily come in and help. There's good resources and books, and I'm just down for that.
And yeah, real quick, I want to give EJ a chance to speak, Dr. Bishop. Yeah, EJ.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been shared so far. I think, you know, for many people of color, including immigrants in this country, you know, our success in this country really have depended on how much we understand and how much we've adopted whiteness, right? And the educational system has been a huge part of that. And in many ways, our educational success really has meant nothing but really an indicator of how much we have adopted whiteness, right? And so we need some major changes there. And I think adopting ethnic studies, right, is huge. I think that's huge. You know, teaching our children, you know, the true history of this country, as painful as that might be, I think it's going to be critical. You know, because, you know, the thing is this, right? It's we can easily put ethnic studies on the same level as math and science and reading and writing. I don't see why we shouldn't, and I don't see why we couldn't. Because otherwise, what we'll end up with is just we'll have a bunch of racist scientists and mathematicians. And as we are seeing now, we cannot have a thriving, truly well society with just a bunch of racist tech people. We need people who understand that for us to have a truly well and thriving society, right, we need people who really care about each other. We need people who understand oppression. We need people who understand racism. We need people who care about other people and not just themselves.
And I want to give Dr. Bishop a chance to respond. You had your hand up as Jasmine.
And I want to say that the change doesn't happen as fast as it should, but we worked with our elders and rewrote a whole entire third grade new curriculum. We wrote our own textbook, and we're publishing it, and it was ready to show right in March at spring break time, but we went into hunkering down, so we didn't do that. And Alaska is the first indigenous language immersion, and so in the nation, right here right in Anchorage, in East Anchorage. And so some of the things that some of our leaders that have assisted us and community leaders, as well as those that are work within ASD, are really striving to make some of those changes. And there's a lot of room to grow. You know, what those things take are policy changes, curriculum changes. They're all by policy and systems, and that, you know, that's where we started in discussing that. We know they're embedded, and we have to again adapt people. You know, we don't want racists, and then also we have to strategically start doing things that make a difference for our young people.
Right. I think many people need to understand that a majority of the racism that we experience on the everyday, you know, on a daily basis now, are more subtle and less overt or less blatant, right? And then the other thing that I want to point out about microaggressions is that for those of us who experience it, it's almost like gaslighting in many ways, right? Because it really plays with our minds in many ways, right? We start asking ourselves, what did I just experience? So we start questioning our reality. Was that racism? Was that sexism, right? Am I just being paranoid? Am I just being overly sensitive? So there's already a lot of that, like a lot of questioning of our reality that consumes a lot of our psychological and emotional resources, right? And so for us then to also be asked to now, hey, how do you teach other people? How do you teach other people to not be offensive? How do you teach other people about your culture? That's a lot more, that's additional burden to the burden that we are already experiencing.
Mayor Berkowitz.
ways you combat microaggressions is with micro-affections. Little nice things. Will you share a meal with me, or explain to me just nice things. We can be nice to each other. We can be kind to each other. And so much of where we are today, because of COVID, because of the economic issues, because of the massive social issues, there's tremendous stress on everybody. People are lashing out, they're short-tempered. And I think if we just practice a little more kindness and maybe some micro-affections, that would really go a long way.
Are you?
Yes. Boy, suddenly I had a whole bunch that I wanted to say in response to what you just said, Mayor Berkowitz. But what it made me think of is the fact that for people of color, for Indigenous, Black people of color folks, I feel like we're operating at any given time under a triple burden. One, trying to understand contextually why things are the way that they are. We've been collectively gaslit throughout our entire lives, through the education system, through the media, all of these things that feed us messages about ourselves or do that through erasure. And so we're kind of, as adults usually, in this kind of grappling, trying to understand what has happened to us. And then when you come to actually understand the true history that you weren't taught, and you come to understand the outrageous injustice of what has happened, I'll speak for myself as an Indigenous person on these lands and what continues to play out every day, there's this internal reckoning that happens with you. For me, it felt like I was thrown off a cliff to come to understand just how widespread and deep the collective gaslighting had been through my own education here in Alaska, on our homelands, on Indigenous homelands. And so you're trying to find out why are things the way that they are, and then you're reckoning with it, and then you're put in a position of burden of then having to educate others. You are the one who then has to tell people, help them to understand and catch them up with the history that they too were not taught in school. And often in the face of rage, defensiveness, anger, tears, guilt, shame, like all of these things that you then have to comfort them or try and mitigate. That popped to mind when you said microaffections. Is I feel that then adds additional burden to the person who just received the microaggression to then not only have to kind of reckon with what just happened, but now I have to be extra nice to you in addition to that. I don't think that that's what you were trying to say, but that's definitely one of my kind of reactions to that. And to your question about microaggressions and the way that we have experienced those, I know growing up for myself, I can't even tell you how many times I heard people comment to me that I was smart for a Native girl, or I was pretty for a Native girl. And coming to an understanding of how twisted and double-edged those kinds of compliments are, and the way that you internalize what they're actually telling you is really rough. The way that shows up as an adult is people saying, oh, you're so articulate, you're so well-spoken, when really what is unspoken in that is you express yourself so well in English, which for Indigenous people in this place, Dr. Bishop said the education system has been the same for the past 100 years. And that's true. And I said earlier that the education system was weaponized against Native people. Here in Alaska and throughout the Lower 48 and also in Canada as well, the state authorized, funded, and mandated the active replacement of our knowledge and seeded really deep seeds of self-hatred, things that showed us that we weren't as good, that our languages, our practices, all of these things were something to be ashamed of. And so right now, to Dr. David's point, success measured by how close to whiteness you are, that continues to show up in our education system. Success is shown by how assimilated you are. If you, like I said earlier, if you're, so articulate or well-spoken, for me, that means that I've gotten further away from my own cultural teachings. I've gotten further away from my cultural knowledge that I so desperately desire and know can help be the medicine for the harms that come with that active replacement.